And today's topic is knowledge versus wisdom. And we get to look at the difference and how we can maybe move knowledge into wisdom. So before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to settle in and get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it and imagine clean, crisp oxygen just flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream and nourishing all your cells and all your organs and bringing vitality and life into every cell of your body. And let's exhale and exhale any tension, any stress. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose. And this time, hold it and imagine sparkling white light coursing through every molecule, every electron of your body, lighting you up, electrifying and energizing and connecting you with the world beyond. And as you exhale, exhale any stress, any tension, relax your shoulders. And now let's take a moment to press our palms together and really, really softly rub your fingers against your palms lightly and gently and feel the tickling and tingling and deliciousness of that wonderful sensation and bring yourself present right here, right now. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to be here with you today, as it is every day of the week. And today we're going to talk about knowledge versus wisdom, because we can have lots and lots and lots of knowledge without necessarily applying it to life in a way that is enriching and wise. So I looked up the definition for wisdom, and what came up was knowledge mixed with good judgment, essentially, and knowledge based or integrated with principles. And knowledge in and of itself is really maybe an accounting. And also, a lot of what we believe we know, we don't, is not actually true. So wisdom, I found a quote actually that says, knowledge speaks, wisdom listens. And I think that that touches into the essential distinction between knowledge and wisdom, is that wisdom is more circumspect. Wisdom is a synthesis. It goes beyond fact or information to move into a realm of maybe application or perspective. And the key is synthesis. So just because I know something doesn't mean I know how to utilize that information to synthesize it into something generative. Wisdom, we often connect wisdom with advice, but where does that advice come from? It comes from experience. It's not always a matter of truth any more than the situations or the facts underlying it are. For instance, why I'm saying just because I believe something is true doesn't make it true. So for instance, in our interactions with other people, we tend to interpret their actions and we interact with that interpretation as if it's the truth. So let's say I'm having an interaction with someone at a supermarket and they look at me a certain way. I might make an interpretation about what they were thinking about me, or how if somebody responded to me in an angry way, it's not necessarily about me. It's most likely about what's going on for them in that moment. Maybe they're just having a terrible day, and then I take it personally, but then I know something about that person. I think I know something about that person based on my interpretation. So, uh, even beyond that, maybe I know that um, I know something about a certain group of people. Well, that may or may not be true. That may be an expression of my prejudice. You know, we in this day and age, particularly, have come to question pretty much everything we know, and to challenge the sources of the information that we are receiving or that we are interacting with. And what wisdom is looking at a bigger picture, incorporating other principles or maybe collections of data, synthesizing it to come to a deeper in deeper interpretation. Good afternoon, Hope. We're talking about the distinction between knowledge and wisdom. So, book knowledge, I guess this is the distinction, for instance, between book knowledge and street smarts in a certain way. Because book knowledge, let's say I learn everything there is about a place I want to visit that's available. You know, I learn about the different attractions of a particular city, for instance, and I learn about the history, and I learn about the hello, Tammy and Danette. Welcome, welcome. So glad you guys are here. Welcome, everybody. It's like it makes me so happy to have you all here and saying hello. It lets me know I'm not talking out into the wind, and I love when you interact with all this stuff too. It enriches the experience for myself and for everybody else, I think. So, knowledge versus wisdom. And I was talking about you can learn everything there is to learn about a city and such, and then you go there and you don't know where the areas are that are safe and where the areas are that aren't. And you know, you don't necessarily know how best to interact with people. Uh, that the one is a book orientation or an academic knowledge, and the other is a maybe more applied knowledge. Maybe that's another distinction between knowledge and wisdom, is maybe wisdom is applied knowledge to a certain degree. You know, it's like maybe I'm thinking of cooking, for instance. So I can have a recipe and put it all together, and it says boil it, and I boil it, but the wisdom comes in when knowing how high to have the heat and what it looks like before it's going to boil over, and that's a greater depth of knowledge than we might have just based on academic knowledge. So, wisdom also may very well be something characterized by knowledge of the heart. So, there's a deeper connection and wisdom in being able to see the context of the information that we have in a broader way. And so that's where we get to apply principles um, and a generative perspective from the information that we're able to gather. I think that synthesis is probably the foundation of wisdom, synthesis of a bunch of different pieces of information. Good afternoon, Emma. Where are you coming in from? Welcome. Glad to have you here. Um, So give me some feedback, guys. Knowledge and wisdom in your own life. Where do you see the distinction? Um, Certainly in relationships, we can have the facts of a, let's say, of an altercation that we hear about or that we participate in. We can have the facts, which may be debatable because based on the perspective from which the situation was experienced. But say that we have the facts, where does the wisdom come in as to how to address that circumstance most effectively? It comes in by having a broader perspective, by being able to step back and synthesize the information coming from a place of non-attachment, perhaps, to be able to stand back and view the situation from a holistic view, from like above, to see all the pieces and how they fit together and how they interact with each other to create a dynamic that then we get to discern. And wisdom is often based on experience. Now, if we this is a really important piece in the synthesis of knowledge into wisdom, is we get to learn lessons from our experiences. However, it's also possible to learn lessons that are not life affirming. Like we were talking about the conflation of emotions, where or of circumstances. For instance, love equals pain. Well, that is based on experience. It is based, that determination is based on experience. It's based on a synthesis. And the question that I have is it wise? Is there wisdom in that? And I'm inclined to say that that's not the final conclusion that we want to interpret as wisdom. I guess that wisdom is not absolute, right? One person's wisdom is another person's misdirection, perhaps. So, maybe there would be wise counsel: steer clear of love or your heart will get broken. And that's one person's interpretation, right? And it is a conflation of things. So how do we discern that the advice that we receive is actually coming from a place of wisdom? Maybe it is wise in some respect to say, if you don't want your heart broken, don't engage yourself in love. However, that's not the message that I would choose. That's not the wisdom that I would choose. So how do we discern what is wisdom? Do we call that wisdom or do we not? We've all been, I'm sure, at the receiving end of advice in all different categories of life, I'm sure. I'm wondering if you've received wisdom that has guided you well, that has I'm inclined to think that wisdom is something that is going to be expansive in general, rather than constrictive, but maybe that's just my personal evaluation. I'd love to hear your experiences of wisdom and people that have granted you broader perspectives. I think about it as broader perspectives. You know, maybe that's a criteria. Maybe wisdom is expansive rather than constrictive. And it's funny, in digging into these questions, oftentimes the way that I think about these things becomes less clear than more clear. And I don't think that that's a deficit. I don't think that that's a problem. And maybe that is leading us to greater awareness ultimately. Having all the answers. So this is really interesting. There's a person in my life who, for quite an extended period of time, would start almost every interaction in a conversation by saying, the answer is, and I wonder what it is, what's important about having all the answers. You know, for me, what's more important is asking questions, because asking questions is a generative thing. Having the answers is a fixed, static place to be. So we often seek answers for things. I think there's more opportunity in being in the question. So I have a client who recently said this, and I thought it was brilliant, is that in their process of growth, what they're doing is they're asking questions that are so vast of themselves that there's no way to be able to answer those questions. And so rather than allowing themselves to just fall into generating answers to these vast questions to try and solve the conundrum, they allow themselves to sort of sink into and expand into the experience of the vastness of the question. And as a result of that, it kind of, we talked yesterday about accessing intuition. These questions, these really vast generative questions, have the capability of expanding your field and connecting you with the broader field, where information might feed in ways that are unexpected. So not as answers, but as responses, and that we get to dance with. We dance with the question, we dance with the information that shows up. And if the question is vast enough, there are multitudes of answers. And then that opens up our opportunity for choice and creativity. So what do you think about, I'm thinking, another thing that just came to mind when talking about wisdom is the serenity prayer, which goes, and I've said this, repeated this prayer a number of times in our talks. It goes, God grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change, courage to change those things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So in that circumstance, what is wisdom? Wisdom to know the difference is looking at, what can I change? Where's my courage? And what can I not change? So I love that, because as we're talking about this whole idea of wisdom and knowledge, in that prayer, we are kind of looking for knowledge of what can I change, what can I not change. And the wisdom is the discernment that takes us beyond our perceived limitations, perhaps, to recognize that we can change our, if we can't change the circumstance, we can change our attitude toward that circumstance, which then changes the circumstance in its own way, right? It's kind of our conversation around pain and suffering. We can have pain without suffering, and we can have pain without suffering because we can allow ourselves to experience the pain as pain. The suffering is when we stand back and have a commentary about the pain and create a story around it. So wisdom and knowledge, I guess the question is, are they separable? I don't know that they are. I don't believe that they are, but wisdom takes knowledge to another dimension, into applying it in our lives and into a synthesis of information. And so I wonder, when we know something, what are we asserting by asserting our knowledge? You know, the thing about knowledge, when we believe we know something, oftentimes what we're doing with our knowledge is asserting that knowledge as opposed to someone else's information. Well, I'm right and you're wrong because I know and you don't. Or what I know is true and what you know is false, right? We take knowledge as oftentimes something to wield over others. And we also try to use that knowledge to, well, knowledge is a wonderful thing. I mean, it betters us in that it gives us more fodder for wisdom. It gives us information to be able to do something, to accomplish things. Knowledge for knowledge's sake, I wonder about that, maybe just for mental entertainment. But wisdom, how do we achieve? We all have wisdom. How do we achieve that? You know, school of hard knocks, perhaps, but again, we need to be alert to the kinds of conclusions and the kinds of wisdom that we draw from our experience. My take is that the wisdom we want to draw from our experience is wisdom that is expansive, that forwards life, that is life affirming, that is generative rather than constrictive. And we might consider it wisdom to say, hey, you know what? If you put your hand over the flame, it's going to get burned, right? That's a fundamental level of wisdom. However, we can be making those same determinations I'm just thinking of other scenarios where we could be putting our hand over a flame and it's a nurturing thing. Like if my hands are wet and freezing cold, maybe if I put my hand over a flame, I can warm my hands, right? The wisdom is how close to the flame before it becomes it transforms from a positive experience to a negative experience, right? So oftentimes the warnings and the wisdom that we are on the receiving end of conditions us into behaviors that are not necessarily life affirming. So not all wisdom is positive, I guess. Um, I suppose in all situations we want to consider the source, right? So what criteria do you use to discern what's true and what's not true, what's wise and what's not wise? And in asking that question, the answer that I'm seeing comes back for all of us to touching in to our heart, to the inner knowing. And it's so interesting to me, actually. I have, in some of my work with people, uh, I often, as part of the core connection process, I say, okay, well, how does that feel? And then I have people telling me, well, I think this, this, and this. And I say, yes, but how does it feel? And then they're still telling a story about it and rationalizing, and but how does it feel? And oftentimes with this sense of wisdom, particularly, we go into our thought. And really, what we've been talking about this week is the distinction between heart and mind in so many ways, and accessing our deepest intelligence, which is the intelligence of the quiet heart. And what I mean by the quiet heart is not the reactivity that we often interpret, but the deep part of ourselves that always has balance, that always is in touch, that is always connected. And it's often overlaid by all kinds of other distractions. But what if we can just melt into that heart space that then connects us to the greater reality, the greater field of information, and find the wisdom and the truth there. So this is a way, by touching into the heart, this is a way to presence ourselves to truth. And I guess it's an interesting question to say, what's the distinction between wisdom and truth? And that maybe there is such a thing as wisdom with a capital W. I'm not certain about that. And the same with truth. You know, we have personal truths, and then there may be universal truths. And today's been a day of questions, so I don't know if you're going on these loop-de-loops with me, but welcome to my brain. You know, just sort of pondering these questions of distinctions and how we can know how to proceed in life, and how we can know what's true and what's not true. That's been a big question for me throughout my whole life, pretty much, is what's real and what's not real, what's true and what's not true. And so my attention goes to these things, especially when I have this forum to be able to share it with you. And I think it's worth considering. I really do, because in allowing ourselves to loosen our hold on the things we believe, there's more possibility available to us in terms of our capabilities, in terms of our capacities, in terms of our fullest expression and our connection to the broader field. So I'm just going to say thanks for playing. Thank you for being with me for this and showing up. And I would love to hear more about what you believe wisdom is, what your experience of knowledge is. And I personally am finding it less important to know, which is kind of a freeing thing, to be able to be more present than to be knowing, if that makes any sense. Um, it's a gentler place to be for me, to just sort of sink into what is present in the moment, and to be responsive to that rather than reactive. I think that as I think about it, it's my knowing of things that gets me into states where or into situations where I have gotten reactive because I know it shouldn't be this way, or I know that I'm right, or I know any number of other things. And then out of that knowing, it often takes me out of being able to be present and in relationship and connected. So on that note, I feel like that kind of tied a bow on things, maybe. Um, yeah. So I invite you to engage in these questions and allow yourself to not know and see what's available out of that. Dido says, I've been noticing that too, that I don't need to read every last book on something like I used to. Yes, yes, like to be okay with not knowing. I'm aware of lots of coaches and teachers and authorities that are very attached to their knowing. And I think that there's a true beauty in allowing ourselves to not know. There's a story of the guy who goes to the master and says, I want to know the secrets of the universe. I want, please teach me. And they're having tea, and I think it's a Zen master, I don't know, is just pouring the tea, and the cup is overflowing and the tea is just pouring out onto the table. And the person who came to the master says, what are you doing? It's the tea, it's overflowing. And um, the 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 tagline, or the punchline, is that you can't uh, you can't put knowledge into a full cup. In other words, this person came with their cup already full of their knowing, and there was no room to receive. And so in being in a place of not knowing or openness, to be entertaining our beliefs as hypotheses rather than as truths, to be in the question rather than the answer, we have the ability to be receptive to experience what's present in a way that is more expansive and generative. So, on that note, thank you for that, Dido. I so appreciate it. And as always, really beautiful contributions. So, thank you all for being here and for playing and engaging in these conversations. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I'm here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And it's my pleasure and my privilege to be with you every day. And I invite you to check out Enlightened World Network's Facebook page. Awesome community. So much love to you, Krista. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you guys for saying hello. It matters. It means the world to me. And until next time, Lots and lots and lots of love.